This is the cheat sheet review for 3 different lessons, number 37, 38, and 39. We've gone a little while before we've done one of these, so let's go ahead and get started with the first one, which is creating class files, creating cohesive classes, and code navigation. All right, and so that is CS-ISP037. And so it was more of a conceptual video in nature, not a lot of code examples. And so I'm just going to give some best practices or some things you should prefer whenever you're composing your own classes. So the first one is that you should prefer more classes, and each of them with more narrowly defined responsibilities in the system. Okay? And then you should prefer to put each class in its own file, and obviously you don't have to do that. We demonstrated how you're able to put multiple classes in that single default.aspx.cs file. However, it's generally preferred for navigation purposes and for code organization to put each of your classes in a separate file and even organize them into folders. All right, and then the next one is the biggie for this lesson, which was to prefer high cohesion, and it's kind of a difficult notion to express, but it has to do with I guess you'd say, the similarity of all of the methods and the properties of a given class, how similar they are, or how single purpose they are. So maybe we can type singleness of purpose of the class members. All right, and then also to achieve high cohesion, a rule of thumb, you should try to make your classes fit on one screen of your IDE. So in other words, no scrolling required. All right. And again, just a rule of thumb to force you to make your classes smaller and more cohesive. Just like the method rule of thumb, where you should have no more than 6 lines of code for a method. And again, this makes your classes more cohesive, and cohesiveness is preferred because it well defines a single responsibility in the system. It makes your code more maintainable, manageable. It increases the reusability of your code, and a lot of other benefits. In fact, we'll talk more about high cohesion in the object-oriented programming series, and we'll discuss it at more length there. But let's move on to the next lesson, which was understanding object references and object lifetime, and that was CS-ISP038. And so basically, an object reference variable holds a reference to an instantiated object in the computer's memory. All right, and so for example, it's my class, my object. Okay, so at this point, all we have is just a reference variable, but it holds nothing. It holds no reference. At this moment, we have to do this: my object equals new my class, and now we've created a new instance of it. So the new keyword creates an instance of the class and returns the address of the object in memory to the reference variable. Okay. So remember, the new keyword creates a new instance. It returns back to you the actual address in memory for that object, so that now you can reference that object in memory by just using, in this case, my object. All right. So more than one object reference variable can hold an address to the object in memory. All right, so for example, we did something like this. My other object reference equals, or maybe let's start over at the beginning here. So my class, my other object reference equals my object. And now we have two handles to the bucket in memory, two strings attached to the balloon, remember? All right, so each time a new reference is added, the reference count increases by 1. Each time an object reference variable goes out of scope or is set to null, the reference count decreases by 1. And so if the reference count is 0, the .NET Framework runtime has this feature called the garbage collector. Okay, it removes the object from memory at an indeterminate point in time in the future. And I said that you can take control of the finalization process and even handle events just before the object is removed. And I said for more information, see the term deterministic finalization. Okay. All right, so that pretty much does it for that lesson. And then the final lesson that we're going to review here is understanding the .NET Framework and compilation. And that is CS-ASP 039. All right, we had a lot to say here. The .NET Framework consists of several different parts. And we didn't talk about all the parts, but here's the ones that are probably the most important to us. Obviously, the runtime. And so it's actually known as the Common Language Runtime, or actually the CLR. You'll see it used like that. And so this is what I call the protective bubble that your application runs in. It manages memory for your application, that whole creating of objects in memory, garbage collection, all that stuff. It also protects the user's machine and a bunch of other runtime related services. Then we have the .NET Framework Class Library, and we said it's known by a couple of different names. .NET Framework Class Library, or just FCL, which is Framework Class Library, or the Base Class Library, or the BCL. Okay, and this basically contains thousands of classes built by Microsoft for every imaginable purpose. Okay, and we can merely reference that work that Microsoft's done in our code and utilize it. All right, and then it has a bunch of different tools like compilers, for example, which is the biggie. And we talked about compilation. And so there's like the C# compiler. We looked at that, the csc.exe. There's also a vbc.exe. So there's a VB compiler, and every managed .NET language, it has a compiler, okay? And basically it just turns your human readable source code into Microsoft Intermediate Language, which is known as MSIL, or just Intermediate Language, IL, and it's packaged into a .NET assembly, which can either be a .exe file, which stands for executable, or a .dll, which is a class library. And do you remember what I said was DLL stands for? Dynamic Linked Library. Okay, lost some of its meaning years ago, but it's still essentially a library. And then there's obviously many other tools and features of the .NET Framework. I don't mean to limit it by just this short list, but this is pretty much the list of things that you're most concerned with whenever building applications in the .NET Framework, at least at first. All right, so I want to talk about compilation a little bit more. There's two compilations. There's an initial compilation that happens to intermediate language, and then a second compilation called JIT, or Just in Time compilation, which is an optimized version of the assembly for the specific hardware and software of the machine you're running it on, and it literally happens at the first request for that given assembly on that particular computer. All right, so the first time you run an application, it's a little bit slower. From that point on, it can then reuse the JITted, J-I-T-T-E-D, the JITted version of the assembly and use that from that point on. Okay, so that is the review for those three lessons. A lot of good material there. Hopefully you understood most of this, and if not, make sure you review it and you get a basic idea of what it's doing. It might take a couple of different exposures to it to really grasp what's going on behind the scenes. But okay, so let's continue on the next lesson. We'll see you there. Thanks.